In the late 1990s, Audi decided not just to create a compact car, but to build a car of the future. Small, light, incredibly efficient, and made almost entirely from aluminum. The Germans spent a huge amount of money on the project and were convinced they had created one of the most advanced cars of its time. But buyers had a different opinion. Instead of a new bestseller, Audi ended up with an expensive aluminum failure. And today, we'll find out whether the Audi A2 was really a bad car or whether it was simply too clever for its time. Audi's model range in the 1990s looked fairly conservative. The most youthful car in the lineup was the compact A3 hatchback, while the larger A4, A6, and A8 were more the result of steady evolution. The A4 replaced the Audi 80, the A6 grew out of the Audi 100, and the A8 took over as the flagship after the Audi V8. But this conservatism mostly applied to production cars. In its concept cars of the first half of the 1990s, Audi was much bolder. There was the Avis Quattro, the Quattro Spider, the aluminum ASF sedan that later evolved into the production A8, and the TT Coupe and TT Roadster concepts, which also reached production fairly quickly. So when Audi showed the compact and very unusual AL2 at the Frankfurt Motor Show in 1997, it did not look like just another motor show fantasy. By that point, the company already had a reputation for sometimes turning bold concepts into real cars. The AL2 was interesting for several reasons at once. First, because of its small, compact MPV format. Second, because of its aluminum body. And third, because of the idea of a 3-liter car. This did not refer to engine displacement, but to fuel consumption, about 3 liters per 100 kilometers. Visually, the AL2 still looks unusual even today, and in 1997, it must have seemed almost like a small visitor from the future. In the end, the A2 really did become a preview of a production model. This is how the Audi A2 appeared, with the internal designation Type 8Z. To build it, Audi invested enormous money and created a special production line at the Neckarsulm plant, where the company already had experience with aluminum structures after the A8. The production version was presented at the Frankfurt Motor Show in September 1999, and by November the A2 was already on the production line. Audi positioned it as Europe's first production 5-door car with fuel consumption below 3 liters per 100 kilometers. But there was an important detail here. Those figures did not apply to every A2, only to the special 1.2 TDI 3-liter version, with a 3-cylinder turbo diesel, an automated gearbox, a start-stop system, and narrower tires. This version weighed only about 830 kilograms. The regular A2 was slightly heavier, at around 895 kilograms, which was still extremely light for a car of this size and equipment level. The body, by the way, was technically quite complex. The outer panels carried almost no structural load. Body stiffness came from the aluminum Audi Space Frame, laser welded from cast and stamped parts. The A2's body frame weighed only about 153 kilograms. 2 people could lift it, and despite its very low weight, the car received 4 stars in the Euro NCAP crash test. Another unusual feature of the A2 was the so-called Serviceklappe, or service flap. On early cars, it looked like a glossy black panel in place of a radiator grille, and behind it were the filler necks for oil and coolant, as well as the oil dipstick. The idea was simple. Basic checks could be done without opening the hood at all, especially since in the usual sense, it did not really open. The aluminum hood weighed about 8 kilograms, was held by 2 rotating latches, and could be completely removed when necessary. Personally, I find this solution questionable. I would not want to trust some random trainee at a service center with removing an aluminum hood. But A2 owners later turned this into their own little game, Haubentauscher, or hood swapping. Enthusiasts exchanged parts and drove around with hoods in different colors. The engine range was modest at first. A 1.4-liter gasoline engine with 74 horsepower and a 1.4 TDI diesel with the same output. Later came a 90-horsepower 1.4 TDI, and then Audi moved slightly away from the original ultra-economical idea and added a 110-horsepower 1.6 FSI. With that engine, the A2 could reach almost 200 kilometers per hour. Of course, even with the most powerful engine, the A2 did not become a hot hatchback. Depending on the version, it accelerated to 100 kilometers per hour in roughly 10.9 to 14.9 seconds. Audi initially planned to build and sell around 60,000 A2s a year, but even in its best period, the model never reached that target. In 2001, Audi managed to sell just under 50,000 cars, and after that, sales began to decline. In total, 176,377 examples of the A2 found buyers during its entire production run. For such an ambitious program, that was very modest, especially compared with its main rival, the first-generation Mercedes-Benz A-Class, which sold roughly 1.1 million units. So why did this happen? The first and most important reason for the failure was price. The Audi A2 was a small car in size, but not in price. For the money of a well-equipped A2, a buyer could already start looking at an Audi A4, a BMW 3 Series, or a Volkswagen Passat. And for a compact city car, that sounded almost like a death sentence. In Audi's case, that price could be explained by expensive technology and an unusual construction. But in the showroom, the buyer mostly saw a small car with modest standard equipment and a long list of expensive options. So not everyone was ready to pay that kind of money for a car in this class. The 1.2 TDI 3-liter version looked especially strange. On one hand, it was the most advanced and economical version of the A2. On the other, in the fight to reduce weight, it lost things that many buyers already considered normal. A person had to understand that the absence of power steering or air conditioning was not Audi being cheap, but the engineers fighting for every extra kilogram and every extra milliliter of fuel. The 3-liter version itself was almost an engineering manifesto. Its all-aluminum 3-cylinder turbo diesel produced 61 horsepower. And to reduce fuel consumption, Audi used an automated gearbox, a start-stop system, narrower tires, lightweight wheels, optimized rear seats, and improved aerodynamics. As a result, Audi managed to keep the weight of the 1.2 TDI version at around 830 kilograms and reduce the drag coefficient to 0.25. In the standard cycle, the car managed 2.99 liters per 100 kilometers. In 2003, this version won the Nordic Eco Run, showing 2.62 liters per 100 kilometers in real-world conditions. So the A2 3-liter really was not just a small Audi, but a light, economical, and technically very complex car. But this is exactly where the main paradox appeared. The most economical version of the A2 was also one of the most expensive and one of the most austere. Its buyer had to be wealthy enough to spend serious money on a compact car, and at the same time committed enough to the idea of efficiency to accept compromises in equipment. There were not many people like that. In total, Audi sold 6,555 examples of the A2 1.2 TDI 3L. Another factor was the aluminum body. For Audi's engineers, it was a huge achievement, but for some buyers, it was a potential problem. Even after a minor accident, repairing this car could be more complicated and more expensive than repairing a conventional steel-bodied car. So one of the A2's main technological features became, for some customers, not an advantage, but another reason to think twice. But while Audi could still live with low sales and keep the A2 around for image and to broaden the model range, constant losses were a much bigger problem. According to some estimates, the company lost around 7,500 euros on every car sold. Despite all the work done by the engineers and marketers, someone in the finance department in Ingolstadt had clearly miscalculated. The situation was almost a dead end. Because production volumes were low and kept falling, the unit cost remained too high, and the losses only grew. Increasing production did not make much sense either, because that risked filling warehouses with unsold cars and creating even bigger losses. In the end, total losses from the project, including development and production, reached 1.3 billion euros by some estimates. That is why the A2's fate was essentially sealed. In 2005, production came to an end. The irony is that inside a Volkswagen group that loved total platform, component, and model unification, The Audi A2 stood out precisely because it was different in almost every way. Maybe that is exactly what killed it. Audi created a truly unique car, but everyone paid too much for that technological leap, both the buyer and the manufacturer itself. Today, the A2 is gradually becoming more expensive on the used market and is increasingly seen as an interesting engineering rarity. But 25 years ago, most buyers simply were not ready to pay that kind of money for a small city car. And who knows how the A2's story might have turned out if it had been a little more conventional, a little less innovative, and sold at a more down-to-earth price.